the earlier generation of Indian diplomats, those who grew under Nehru's influence, they realized that India was not a rich country, India was not a major industrial economy, India was not in a position to use money to earn friends. So they chose to use, quote unquote, kind of India's culture as a weapon to project India's image, and also build this whole non-aligned movement and show the world that the Africans are with us, the Southeast Asians are with us, the Latin Americans are with us, the Arabs are with us. This whole trade union approach, that I have the numbers. I may not have the money, but I have the numbers, right? So that was the way in which I call the non-aligned movement a trade union movement. The rich man is a capitalist, and you want to negotiate with him, you need a union. Alone, you can't negotiate, right? So non-aligned movement was a trade union movement, and we were trade union leaders.
What foreign policy did the non-aligned movement have? None. Apart from your national security, what you're talking about, unity and integrity of your country, what is the primary aim of foreign policy? To improve the well-being of your people.
Indian diplomacy was all about giving grand speeches and making big statements about India's destiny, civilization, culture, all this big stuff. While the real business of diplomacy was about money, market access, investments, that was what the rest of the world was looking at.
We were looking at ourselves as a more or less autonomous economy, which could not be globalized. We were scared of globalization. We were scared about admitting foreign investment, and we were scared about how trade would affect our economy. And perhaps for these reasons, it affected our relationship with the world, because the world did not take us that seriously.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In the year 1989, the Soviet Union accounted for 17% of our trade. And by 1992, this went down to 2%. So here was a country that was an important defense partner, strategic partner, trading partner, and then suddenly it disappears.
In the world, the Soviet Union had collapsed. Germany was being united. USA was becoming the sole superpower.
Well, Indian diplomacy was blind to the change. In fact, the kind of dispatches that our ambassador and other diplomats were sending to Delhi gave the impression to the political leadership that, this is one more of those things that happens in the Communist Party, and the Communist Party will come back. By the end of 91, by December 91, when it became clear that things were rapidly changing, Narasimha Rao started talking to the better informed diplomats. For example, Ronen Sen, who was a joint secretary in Rajiv Gandhi's PM.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had a completely different situation, and he realized that. He didn't believe in slogans, he believed in how it should happen, because he was not fond of rhetorical flourishes or event management. No. But in terms of building those institutions,
he stepped back a little he did not join any anti-Western world, etc. rhetoric. He slowly distanced himself from the old non-aligned formulation.
And he laid down the ground rules for that plan. So I think it was a very important part of Indian history that such a thing happened, that he went out and did it and told the world that we are now open. India is open to do business. We are not the older India.
India is open for business. We are interested in partnership, in forging long-term relationships with our foreign partners for the benefit of both sides.
It was a new period in India. No one could think that an Indian Prime Minister would be going out asking foreign investors for money, because we were so steeped in self-reliance, so steeped in our license Raj, so steeped in the way that only Indian manufacturers could do things, for someone to be so radically changing a program, an economic program, was the big surprise.
The fact that the reform process took off, it made our international relations far easier, which were complicated before that. For instance, in the case of China, his very visit to China was very significant.
You know, I mean, there's this famous Mao Zedong phrase, walking on two legs. So I think in a sense, Narasimha Rao said to the Chinese, let's walk on two legs. One leg is economic, one leg is bilateral relationship. And was able to separate the economic relationship from the border and political relationship.
He also had this major thrust towards the ASEAN countries, the Association of Southeastern Nations. Now, this was again something where he talked of the look east.
Lee Kuan Yew, who was the founder president of Singapore, approached India for a partnership. India was invited to be a founding member of ASEAN when ASEAN was launched. And we said, no, all these small countries, they're a big country. Singapore was a small city, like Bombay, is not a country.
We had neglected the East, even in Pandit Nehru's time. He hardly took any interest in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia. Not much.
So we had a very condescending attitude. We thought, we were far too important, and this part of the world was like dealing with the small Indian states. What we did not understand is the kind of rapid progress they were making. And I think finally Narasimha Rao was the first Prime Minister who reached out. And the Singapore Prime Minister at that time was Goh Chok Tong. And Goh Chok Tong has written and has spoken about it many times that Narasimha Rao's visit to Singapore, I think in early 92, created an India fever. This was the phrase used by Goh Chok Tong. Created an India fever. And once there was an India fever in Singapore, because it's the most developed of the ASEAN countries, everybody in the region woke up. Suddenly everybody said, why is Singapore paying so much attention to India? So Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, all of the region woke up to India.
Then he sort of made a dramatic shift by upgrading his relations with Israel.
A major decision to take. In 1992, he said, we'll open an embassy and they will open an embassy here.
When PV discovered that the Cold War had ended and we must build relationship with the United States, he thought that the best way to forge a relationship with the United States is to forge a relationship with Israel, given the enormous influence Israel had in the United States. Israel, the Jewish lobby in American politics is extremely influential.
We should have had open relations with Israel much earlier. Because it may be a small country, but it's a very influential country.
And Narasimha Rao understood that if I build a bridge with Israel, then I build a stronger relationship with the United States.
Let's face facts. The US relationship involves the political, the military, defense, and the economic and commercial, and of course much else, trade and so on. But the first thing he did was give them the political confidence that we are not looking for allies to balance our relationship with the US, because the Soviet Union had just collapsed. His visit in 1994, which was my first visit, and I joined just before that, was momentous. In fact, we got a very good declaration out of the US. He established a level of confidence with President Clinton, which was, I would say, almost unprecedented till then. And so this confidence is what resulted in the turnaround.
And if you see the support for India in the US Senate on various legislations, it increased every year during Narasimha Rao's term. So there was clearly a recognition that India was becoming more open to investment, more open to trade. And so the business leadership in the US became softer and softer towards India.
Clinton, who was very hostile to him to begin with, by the time he ended, had become quite friendly.
A lot of academic debate wrongly makes the assumption that because he is the father of liberalization, he must have been anti-poor.
Narasimha Rao used to, bring in the kind of humanistic angle to this. I don't know if you're familiar. Those days, he used to talk about the media reports used to be full of safety net kind of things, because a lot of reforms being introduced, and if somebody was to fall off, between, the things, you need to provide a safety net, reforms with a human face.
The whole program which we have adopted in India is a program with a human face. We want a change. There is no question on that. But at the same time, we want it with a certain amount of humaneness.
Before Narasimha Rao, the state was very small. Though someone like Indira Gandhi kept talking about socialism, if you look at actual national expenditure on health, on education, it was very little. Indira Gandhi's socialism was a name only. And the reason why the pre-economic reform Indian state did very little was because revenues were very small. India was growing at a very small pace. We just didn't have the revenues. The amount of money that Indian government had before Narasimha Rao for welfare schemes were very small. Naturally, you did very little for the poor.
कि जो सोशल सेक्टर जिसको कहते हैं, सामाजिक जो क्षेत्र है, उस पर इतना पैसा हम नहीं लगा पाए. ठीक है, हमने स्कूल खोले, दवाखाने खोले, प्राइमरी हेल्थ सेंटर्स काफी खोले, लेकिन उनमें कुछ कमी रह गई, पैसे की कमी रह गई. इसलिए उनके चलने में और उनमें जो औजार चाहिए, जो और चीज़ें चाहिए उनको अच्छी तरह से चलाने के लिए, वो पैसा हमारे पास नहीं था. इसलिए नहीं था कि हम बड़े बड़े कारखाने लगा रहे थे जिसमें 1000 करोड़, 2000 करोड़, 3000 करोड़ खर्च होता है. तो ऐसा लगा एक ऐसी चादर है जिसे हम ओढ़ते हैं, सिर ढकने की कोशिश करते हैं तो पैर निकल आता है, पैर ढकने की कोशिश करते हैं तो सिर बाहर निकलता है. तो ऐसी चादर तो नहीं थी जिससे हम सिर भी ओढ़ें और पैर भी ढक सकें, क्योंकि गरीब देश है. अब इसको बहुत ज्यादा वर्णन इसका करने की कोई आवश्यकता नहीं है, सीधी बात.
He was always deeply concerned, as a former socialist and a genuinely dedicated public servant, deeply concerned about poverty and about the lack of opportunity of the ordinary people. And they cannot be improved merely by economic growth. Economic growth is absolutely necessary. Market reform is absolutely necessary. But the state performing its functions is even more necessary. And he was always mindful of that. And therefore, he always put things in perspective.
कहीं और से चाहिए पैसा, जिसके पास है हमारे देश में वो भी लगाए, और बाहर से पैसा आ सकता हो, कोई आने को तैयार हो तो उसे भी हम ले आए. यहाँ से बहुत पैसा गया है. पिछले 200-300 साल में पता नहीं कितना पैसा यहाँ से लाद के लोग ले गए. हीरे जवाहरात, अच्छी चीजें ले गए. साम्राज्य का जमाना था, उनकी इच्छा जहाँ उनकी नजर पड़ी उठा के ले गए. अब कम से कम कुछ बाहर से यहाँ आए तो इसमें बुराई क्या है?
Narasimha Rao's genius was in recognizing that if you actually wanted welfare schemes for the poor, you had to ensure that you get government revenue, and the only way to get government revenue going is to improve the economy, is to reduce constraints on corporates and business and multinationals.
तो हमने कहा कि भाई आप कोई बिजली का कारखाना लगाना चाहोगे, उत्पादन करोगे तो लाइए पैसा. हमारे भी कुछ लोग लगाते हैं निजी क्षेत्र में, और यहाँ के लोगों को नौकरी मिलेगी, काम मिलेगा, किसानों को बिजली मिलेगी.
Then in the way Narasimha Rao saw it, you needed one for the other.
Under Narasimha Rao, the budget for rural development was more than quadrupled. It was unheard of before Narasimha Rao that much of an amount could be spent for rural development. That was the kind of game changer that he introduced in rural development.
He told the Planning Commission that 30,000 crores is not a magic number. It is only the minimum. If you can make it 35, 40, 50, I would be happy, because you will be doing in advance in the rural areas what you would have to do otherwise.
He did the foundational work for the Rural Employment Guarantee Program subsequently, for the Civil Supplies Program subsequently, for many of the welfare schemes that came up later, that he did lay the ground for it.
During his time, many state-level welfare schemes such as midday meals first came to national prominence.
But these programs are all managed by the state government, and the central government has absolutely no control over how these things are managed at the ground level. As a result, a lot of this is quite wasteful.
Once you open the market, then you have opened the market for privatization of health and education as well. This is the distortion that has come into it, and that needs to be corrected. And I have a feeling he would have corrected it, because it was clearly a distortion. One will have to have the state to serve, to do welfare program, to see that there are public goods, to see that the private does not take over, because once the private takes over health and education, you're already excluding.
मैं तो मान लीजिए खुद अपने आप से ही कह रहा हूं, देखिए और क्या दूसरे क्षेत्रों में क्या हुआ है, क्या हमने करने की कोशिश की है, कहाँ नाकाम हुए हैं, कहाँ कामयाब हुए हैं, दोनों को भी देखना पड़ेगा, दोनों फील्डों को जोखना पड़ेगा। ये नहीं कहा जा सकता कि हमने जो कुछ भी किया है सब कुछ सफल हुआ है, नहीं होता है। हम इंसान हैं, इंसान गलती भी करता है, इंसान में कमी होती है, नहीं तो फिर ये भगवान हो जाता है। तो ये इंसानों की सरकार है, इंसानों का समाज है, इंसानों की बस्ती है, तो इसमें सभी चीजें रहेंगी।
It could have been that he felt that there were certain reforms that did not help what he was trying to do, because he was at heart a socialist, he was at heart non-aligned, and he basically wanted the best for as many Indians as possible. He was not a 21st century politician. He was a 20th century politician, and in that sense he felt that, look, disinvestment, for instance, is okay provided you can make sure that you have the reins of that particular sector of the economy. If you're going to disinvest and allow people to raise electricity prices at their will, then what's the use? And so on and so forth. So there might have been aspects about the economic reforms that he did that didn't please him, but he had little choice.
There are some worries whether inequality has risen since 91, but it is inarguable that GDP has improved, and it is also inarguable that general prosperity has improved for every percentile in India.
Inclusiveness, it's better than people think, because poverty has gone down.
Poorest Indian is less poor today thanks largely to the policies initiated by the Narasimha Rao government.
I think aspirations have really shot up, and progress in certain critical areas like primary health, primary education, education for girls, maternal mortality. There is progress, but it's not enough. So I would give it half marks there.
So I think it's fair to say that Narasimha Rao's execution of welfare schemes was not as good as his execution of economic reform. But when it came to intent, when it came to budget, and when it came to expertise, Narasimha Rao is definitely the father of India's welfare schemes.
The period was a euphoria of celebrating or criticizing the economic reforms. So what he did as welfare somewhere was tucked behind, although one should talk a lot about it.
Most of the people did not understand the depth of the kind of work that he was doing when it was being done. From 1991 to 1996, when the entire work was going on, the first budget was presented, there were momentous changes, people just didn't understand what those things could lead to, what India might come out of those measures.
Cumulative effect of all this probably surfaced just about when the UPA government came to power, which is why in those years, in the UPA 1, for example, the average growth rate was over 8%. It wasn't because of something that UPA did specifically, it was the cumulative effect of reforms raising the growth rate of the economy.
whether it is foreign policy, whether it is welfare schemes, and whether first and foremost it is Narasimha Rao's economic policies, which unquestionably he was the principal architect of, it has transformed Indians.